WCCS AM 1160, FM 101.1. He is the State House Majority Leader. State Representative Dave Reed joins us in the studio today. Good to see you.
Todd, good to actually be in the studio this morning.
Yeah. Well, it has been quite a burden on you and on all of your colleagues in the State House and, well, the state government as a whole, trying to deal with this budget thing. And as we're not quite over the mountain, but it appears as if we are pretty well have this thing put to bed. Reflect back on the process of the past few months and tell us how you felt about it going through it and how you feel about it now.
Well, I think we are pretty much so done with the budget process. The only bill left out there is the actual school code bill that goes with the budget. It's one of the trailer bills that's needed as part of the budget process, and we were notified yesterday by the governor. The governor's going to let that become law without his signature on Sunday, so that will formally conclude the budget process. But look, they're challenging times. Really, it's been challenging for about 6 or 8 years now, ever since the recession hit and, the economy was a little out of whack across the Commonwealth, and that affected the state budget situation. And, of course, you had, the 4 years of the Corbett administration with deficits and then the 3 years of the Wolf administration with deficits. And really, if you look at the beginning of this year, folks were looking at about what potentially was a $4 billion operating deficit in the Commonwealth. And, the governor proposed a number of tax increases associated with that. And to his credit, he also produced some reductions in spending at the governmental level. And then the House entered into that process, and we further reduced spending associated with that budget and went through kind of a ping-pong process with the Senate and the administration for a number of months. And I don't think anybody could say that was a pretty process, because when you're negotiating through a $4 billion deficit out of a $32 billion operating budget, it's not going to be a pretty process. You're not left with good choices versus bad choices. You're generally just left with a laundry list of bad choices that you've got to pick the least bad choice out of that process. And I think we actually came to that conclusion, without any broad-based tax increases. In fact, the only tax associated with this budget was closing a couple loopholes associated with the changes in technology occurring in recent years, and then the legalization of fireworks and the tax associated with that. So, it's not a pretty process, but, finally came to a conclusion. The spending package, which was passed back in June, increased our investment in education from pre-K education, basic education, the whole way to higher education, like schools like IUP, and then to conclude the revenue process over the past week or so here, I think finally puts the issue to bed, and we can move on to looking at some other issues that folks want to discuss in the upcoming months. And, of course, we'll be right back at the budget process at the turn of the year.
We have talked in the past about causes and how it was that we got to this point, and the number of causes all coming together from all different angles to create a really bad situation. Moving forward, though, the questions arise. Does the state have enough revenue coming in? Is there a better process for determining how much revenue is coming in? All of those things have to become a part of any future budget talks. Otherwise, we're right back at this, and we're right back in that same boondoggle that we've been in for the last 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're going to see a couple budgetary reforms pushed by the House over the next couple weeks, next couple months to help make that process smoother. But in reality, when you're looking at balancing the budget overall, I know we've talked before about the 4 major cost drivers in our budget: the debt payments from money that was spent years ago, our correctional system, our pension system, and entitlement programs. And, the good news is we addressed pension reform this June. That will start to bend that cost curve over the years ahead. It doesn't necessarily solve your situation immediately, but it will make decisions better in the future. We actually passed debt reform as a part of this budget as well that'll further increase or decrease our debt obligation by $300 million, bringing the total over the last couple of years to about $900 million reduction in our debt ceiling at the state level, unlike what's been happening at the federal level. With correctional reform enacted a couple years ago, we're finally seeing our inmate population decrease. So the last real big cost driver out there is our entitlement system, and a lot of that is determined upon what happens in Washington, D.C., particularly with the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, and giving a little bit more flexibility to the states to help shape those programs to make sense for our state as opposed to just 50 states in general.
Late in the budget process, a group of House members came forward with a spending plan that would include using basically money that was sitting around in shoeboxes in Harrisburg in the various departments. Are there enough shoeboxes full of money sitting around in Harrisburg unused that that could be a future area of reform? If money is allocated, money gets spent, or else it goes back in.
Well, we actually did use $300 million worth of special fund transfers as a result of the final budget conclusion last week. Now, I think some of the numbers put out there by some folks, $2-3 billion worth of funds just sitting there. It kind of depends on your definition of funds sitting there. Even in your own house, if you got money sitting in a shoebox, chances are some of that money's sitting there with a purpose. Maybe you're saving up to put on a new roof, or, you got to, fix up the driveway. You got to get a new washer or dryer. Your heating system's about to go, or you got to get a new car because you got 200,000 miles on your car. So you've been savings. So a lot of that money sitting in those special funds, I think, wasn't necessarily just sitting there randomly. But I think there was some excess funds that could be transferred over. And that's why, we were able to push and get $300 million out of those special funds, which helped, balance the budget and reduce the need for tax increases on folks across the state.
Even since the budget has been resolved, new issues have come up that are sometimes old issues. And one of the big ones that have come up for discussion in recent weeks is property tax reform. Yep. Is it happening?
Look, I think, number one, we've got a very important decision for folks to make when they go to vote next Tuesday, and I would encourage people to go out and vote. Not only are you electing school board members, judges, county row offices, local elected officials, but you have a referendum on the ballot that would allow the General Assembly and school districts to actually eliminate property taxes for your residential property, meaning not your vacation home, not rental properties, not commercial properties, but the home that you actually live in or the farm that you actually reside in, without eliminating school property taxes for the other properties. And the importance of that is if you just do the home that you live in, it takes about $6 or $7 billion to come up with the revenue necessary. If you've got to do it across the board, it's about $15 billion. So you make the journey a lot shorter in that process. Now, this constitutional amendment would only allow that discussion to occur because we've got something called the uniformity clause in our Constitution that says if you reduce property taxes for one type of property, you have to reduce it for all types of property. This would allow an exemption to that to allow us to just focus on the homes that people reside in as opposed to any other property out there. So I would encourage people, read a little bit more about that referendum. If you have any questions, feel free to call my office. We'll be happy to get the answers for you. But please make sure you go out and vote. If not for all the local races, but, take a shot at that referendum because I think it's an important referendum that could shape that discussion going forward.
And that then would put the burden on the school district itself to say, yes, we're going to do that and find a different revenue source?
Well, I think the school district and the Commonwealth, the state, because, look, you're never going to come up with that much revenue at the school district level. A lot of school districts are very poor school districts, particularly here in Indiana County. If you exclude Indiana from that equation, you have most of the other school districts get over 50% of their budget from the Commonwealth. I think that gets into a discussion on, do you prefer an income tax? Do you prefer a sales tax? Combination of the two. I personally think any option is better than the option we have right now with the school property tax proposal. Or the way it's formulated right now. So this, I think, allows that greater discussion to occur in a more narrower focus on the homes people are actually living in.
State House Representative Dave Reed, he is the House Majority Leader with us here this morning on Indiana in the Morning in studio. And as we think about what's coming forward then in the coming months, what are some of the issues you want to see tackled in Harrisburg?
Well, one of them, as I mentioned, I think we're going to look at some budgetary reforms in the House just from a process perspective of, the separation of a spending plan with a revenue package. I think for far too many years, folks have been able to get off, well, I'm going to vote for the spending plan, but then when it comes to vote for the revenue associated with that, well, I can't vote for that. Mm-hmm. If you're going to vote for one, you should be voting for the other. I mean, it's just common sense. And, it should be part of the process. And I understand constitutionally that's not actually allowed to occur today because of court rulings about you can only have one subject in one bill. Well, I think this is actually one of those areas where the public would prefer both be in the bill together. And if you're for one, you're for the other. If you're against one, you're against the other. You don't get to take credit for one side of it while denying that you had any responsibility for the other side. I think there's going to be a greater discussion depending on how this referendum turns out on school property tax elimination. And I think tax reform overall. We see that discussion going on at the federal level. it's probably time to have that discussion at the state level as well. Most of our tax system was created decades ago, if not half a century ago. Doesn't necessarily align with the year 2017 and beyond.
2018 will be a gubernatorial election year, and that means that those campaigns are going to be heating up. We're going to find all kinds of different proposals coming, sometimes from people who have been informally running and now are going to formally run for governor, and some of those folks are in the legislature. When those election years come along and money starts getting discussed and different proposals are thrown out there, as the guy who is in charge of the State House majority, you have to look at some of those things and determine, well, what really has merit as a piece of legislation? What do I see as, okay, this is just somebody electioneering here? Do you find yourself having to make those considerations much?
Well, I have not been in this position since we've had a gubernatorial election, because I came in at the same time Governor Wolf did. So it will be an interesting process to go through. I will say this, I think there's all types of proposals that are introduced election year or non-election year. Some are realistic, some are just folks looking for talking points to kind of throw out concepts and ideas. And you're right, part of my job is to try to determine, how you mold some of those ideas together for actual policy proposals that make sense, that can garner the support necessary and actually move Pennsylvania in the right direction. So it'll be a new experience for me next year. I'm looking forward to that experience, and we'll see where it goes.
All right. Well, those are some of the discussions that will be going on in here. So we want to get back to the budget for one other time. You and I discussed this once previously. Looking at other states and the way they do their budgets, the way they fund their budgets, the way they come up with their spending plans, is there one out there that is similar to the way Pennsylvania does it, and how do they get around it? Or is there one out there that you say, that's something we ought to consider here, the way that state does its budget process?
Overall, the actual requirements are not that bad in Pennsylvania, because we do have a balanced budget requirement, meaning however painful the process is in any given year, when that process concludes, we do have to have a balanced budget, meaning we can't have a deficit and carry that deficit forward to next year and the year after that and the year after that, like the federal government has done, because that just accumulates debt and makes the problem worse and worse and worse. So I think that balanced budget requirement in Pennsylvania is actually fairly strong, even though it's a fairly ugly process to weed out the final budget proposal in some years. I think, look, it's difficult in a state like Pennsylvania as well, because we're a diverse state. We've got two major urban atmospheres. We've got a lot of rural Pennsylvania in between. We've got, what's been called the 14th, 15th largest economy in the world operating within our state. And, you look at something just like taking care of our roadways. We've got more roadways than all the New England states, including New York and New Jersey combined. It's an expensive state to operate from that particular perspective. But, we also have a lot of resources that we can take better advantage of. We've got tremendous water resources, energy resources, workforce, education. So, hopefully we're able to better align some of those things going forward.
All right, very good. You have any events coming up within the district here?
We actually have a town hall meeting tonight, 6 p.m. out at Clymer Volunteer Fire Company. So anybody looking for a last-minute way to spend their Thursday evening, come on out, discuss some policy issues with us.
There you go. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Todd.
It is Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank. It's WCCS, AM 1160, FM 101.1.